Hi, we'd like to extend our stay
and upgrade. Hey residents, welcome back to Hotel Earth Podcast and our next installment of the agriculture season. I'm Lexi.
And I'm Ari. Hello.
Hi. Today we'd like to start with an observation that I have heard quite frequently, especially recently. Maybe it's just my algorithm. And I would say is particular to our generation.
All right, let's hear it.
It's this general description of the system is too big, it's too powerful. Why bother trying to change it? We're just little sheep in a big machine, and there's no point. I've been there also. I've been one of these voices, maybe once or twice.
You know what? I have also been one of those voices. I'm embarrassed to say, and I'm embarrassed to say it because I know I probably will say something to that effect again, just knowing myself and also depending on my cycle. I get a little bleak sometimes. It is bleak, okay? It's bleak. And yes, I've heard different variations of that too. You know, so often we hear that we can't change the system. Like, even you and me, we've been told, like, we're just two, like, girls that do this podcast. How many times has someone told me, okay, like, but, like, do you actually think, like, any of this is making a difference? You know, it's too big, it's too powerful, the system is too much bigger than you'll ever be able to, like, influence.
Yeah.
And we can't do anything to shift policy. Like, people actually believe that they can't do anything to shift policy, and it's just, like, a hopeless endeavor. Like, okay, Amanda, yes, I hear you. Okay? Amanda, it is big, okay? It is powerful. It is really hard to change, okay? Understanding policy and understanding government, and then, you know, let's take a step further, understanding how it influences industry even, and vice versa, is complicated. It is not easy, and it's, like, not supposed to be easy to understand, you know? It's like, it is difficult on purpose because they don't want you participating. But today I want you and I to do what Hotel Earth really aims to always do, which is make that complicated stuff a little more manageable, a little more digestible. We are going to address how we, you know, normal folk like you and me, influence government and industry standards.
And no, we're not going to suggest that you all quit your jobs and go to law school, which is what I did, because I was like...
She's like, I'm going to understand the law if it's the last thing I do.
Ask me if I understand the law.
No, she does, guys. Trust me, she does. I can attest we just spent half an hour. No, between the two of us, go to her for law stuff. Come to me for music.
Everything else.
Encyclopedic knowledge. No, I'm not actually that useful.
That's not true. No, but very seriously, I've heard a lot, like, I'm half kidding. I did quit my job and go to law school because I was dissatisfied with how
she did.
The environmental...
I literally saw her. I witnessed this entire thing. Yeah. She did do that.
Let me be the first to say that should not be necessary. And I'm also not a unique case when it comes to why people go to law school. Yesterday, there was a group of people, prospective students that were touring our law school, and one prospective student said the reason they want to go to law school is because they want to change public health outcomes, which is great. But one of the professors said, then maybe you should pursue a master's in public health. Not because law school isn't a great option.
Your professor's like, you're in the wrong class.
But because law school shouldn't be this thing that is required in order to influence government. Okay, so back to you, Ari, because I know that there is something that we talked about last time that I'm hoping you'll bring up now.
Well, you're in luck because I think I know what you're referencing, and I have a story. I want to start today with a story. I feel like we need a little more like storytelling in our lives, okay?
Yeah.
So allow me, gather around the fire, get a cozy beverage. Allow me to set the scene for you. It's 1988. Maybe you got a Walkman clipped on your belt buckle. I don't know. But you're flipping through the TV channels, and all of a sudden, you see a clip of cute little dolphins being crushed to death. Being crushed to death in fishing nets and flopped onto boats, maimed and lifeless. What possibly could have led to such lovable creatures to these horrific endings? It's a natural question. Oh, it's a tuna boat. The dolphins were collateral damage of tuna fishing. Now, I think I speak on behalf of most sane people that no one wants to see that.
No.
How could consumers in good conscience eat canned tuna knowing that it is the product of such violence against these cute little dolphins? We like the cute little dolphins. Hitting us right in the ethos. Well, pal, enter the point to this soliloquy I just gave you. The Tuna Boycott of 1988. I think most people have heard of this, even if it was like filed deep in the archives.
Even if it was their grandparents that experienced it, because that's...
Is that how far back 1988 is? Oh, God.
Yeah, because we're doing our parents a disservice by not having children by this point, honestly. Anyways, keep going.
I just got the funniest thought. It's like, have you seen those memes where it's like me doing literally anything except giving my mom a grandchild? And I'm like, it's like
Yes.
Lexi and I, we're about to approach the next decade, okay, of 30. And we're sat here on a podcast and not having children. Yep. So, anyways, the point to this soliloquy, the tuna boycott of 1988. And leading up to that moment in history, there was already tension, kind of building up to that point. So in the 60s and the 70s, word was spreading about the ethical concerns in the canned tuna industry, okay? But the movement turned into a global firestorm when an undercover biologist by the name of Samuel Lebud, I want to say, sorry, Sam, if I messed that up, took a job on a Panamanian tuna boat. Again,
Shout out.
Undercover. Badass. He filmed 15 minutes of graphic footage showing dolphins being crushed in the fishing nets and hauled onto the boating deck. So,
You're telling me this was 15 minutes of footage? This wasn't a whole docuseries?
it was 15 minutes of footage that he managed to somehow get with imagine 1988. This man had a camcorder somehow undercover.
No, not just a camcorder. He was rolling up on the decks like this, I'm sure.
Literally.
Wait,
It was like-
can you move your arm a little bit? Okay, yeah.
And then, the other people on the boat were probably like, what the hell is this guy doing?
Yeah,
He's like, don't worry.
Sam
This
doesn't
is
have meta
personal.
glasses on.
I'm making some memories I'm going to take back home to the kids. It's just like a home video. This man sold it to the news networks, okay? Undercover, sold the footage. And it was aired on all major TV networks, obviously sparking an immediate reaction. And also a massive grassroots boycott of canned tuna led by school children and families across the United States. This boycott led to a domino effect of domestic and international laws that redefined what sustainable fishing was and what that looked like in practice.
You know, the 60s and 70s were a particularly tumultuous time for, I would say, like, environmental reform.
Yeah.
And
all kinds of like ethical
yes.
concerns and movements during that time. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see examples of this, like how public outcry and lawsuits spurred amendments like the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And this greatly reduced the number of dolphins that were actually caught in tuna nets. And then in 1990, recognizing that consumers wanted to know if the tuna that they purchased was harvested by killing dolphins, even if done by like an international fishing operation, Congress actually passed the Dolphin Protection Consumer Information Act, try saying that 5 times fast, which mandated that any tuna labeled quote unquote dolphin safe had to meet strict criteria. And I mean, like, strict criteria. In fact, violations of this act were punishable by up to $100,000 in civil penalties, and that's in the 90s. I don't know if that figure has moved, probably not, but still, it's like not a nothing number. And while the label itself is voluntary, many major companies like Bumblebee, Starkist, and Chicken of the Sea committed to the label in order to survive the boycott. Like, hello, if I was meeting the criteria, I wouldn't want to be the only brand not labeled dolphin safe, even if I was. You know what I mean? Like, it really forces.
That's just good. That's obviously it's just good marketing. That's just good business at that point. Like, it would be frankly stupid to not.
For sure, it would be business. It would be like signing your business's death certificate, basically.
Yeah.
And by 1995, this policy change had global influence. Like, the International Dolphin Conservation Program, a legally binding international treaty, set strict annual dolphin mortality limits, which are still in place to this day, for the entire fleet of fishers in the eastern tropical Pacific Ocean. And this program observed dolphin deaths be cut from, are you ready? 100.
I actually don't know the figures of this.
From 133,000 deaths in 1986 to fewer than 900 in 2023. Yeah,
that is awesome.
Policies.
I mean, yeah.
It's not just about showing up at the polls, right? Like,
yep.
It's an incredible feat. Sometimes policy doesn't have that strong of an impact on something, but like, this is a perfect example of how policy is shaped by voices, meaningfully shaped by voices, by demand, by making educated decisions, not being on like a moral, pedestal.
Yeah.
But like actually doing something about it.
Yep.
Grassroots movements. So yes, it may seem like our pull in a system that seems to only respond to money and power is small, but that's just the thing. The big industries got big, because they filled a demand, a consumer demand. And if that demand changes, the industry must respond if it intends to stay alive and relevant in the market, which this is a prime example of how that plays out.
And I'm so glad that you bring this up, because it's exactly why I wanted to talk about the tuna boycott, okay? Like,
I figured.
One example, one example, and, as we see, like, 900 dolphins are still dying in 2023. That's still a lot. That's still not cool. So, like, is the policy perfect? No.
It'll never be.
Am I saying the canned tuna industry is, like, completely sustainable now? Absolutely not. What just as you said, the whole point of the story time is that this was not shaped by the big guys. The regulation came from families and kids and moms who saw the footage and were shooketh and said, what they said is like, I'm not gonna buy your tuna. You know what, Starkist? I'm not going to buy your tuna because you killed the cute little dolphins. So until you stop killing the cute little dolphins.
Starkist, you can kiss my consumer dollar goodbye.
Exactly. And yeah, as Lexi said, the consumer dollar has a lot more say than you may think. And the tuna boycott is just a really good example of our ability to sway industry, and sway industry standards and government policy. It also happens to be my mom's favorite example, as she was an active participant in the 80s and 90s. So, hi, Mom. Thank you for always telling me about the tuna boycott and that if I really wanted to get something done, I could.
That's so cute.
She was like, you have a say in the system, Ari. Just remember the tuna boycott of 1988. And I'm like, okay.
Oh, yeah, sister.
Thanks. I'm like,
6-year-old Ari eating her canned tuna is like...
I'm like, was a dolphin killed in the process of this? She's like, actually, no. And you want to know why?
Mommy, how do I know it's actually tuna in here? Well, let me tell you.
Let me tell you about the tuna boycott of my day. So here's Tucker Garrison from Imlakesh Organics. We've introduced him in previous episodes of this season, further emphasizing how consumers have an impact with their dollars.
One of the beautiful things about capitalism, of its, some challenges that it has, at least just like unfettered, rampant capitalism, is that we vote with our dollars. And I know that probably everyone listening to this has heard that I vote with dollars, but like Walmart would go out of business if everyone stopped shopping there. Like, this is a fact. It's not an opinion, right? Now, getting everyone to do that, and I'm not saying they should, and not even necessarily saying there's anything terribly wrong with Walmart, but I'm just using it as an example of like, I think that systemic change can be made through shifting your purchasing towards things that you agree with and that matter, and away from things that you don't agree with, right? Like that's a great thing we can do. And again, I understand that part of this comes down to privilege, and that like many people are struggling at this time, especially with all the rising costs and everything going on. And so it's like there are big and small ways that can happen, but especially if you have the means to do so, like shifting as many of your purchasing choices to a direction that's supporting the companies and people, like it has a multiplying ripple effect, right? Because then all the dollars that you give to somebody that also cares usually get spent somewhere else good.
Currently, similar to what was experienced in the 60s and 70s, I might say, we are in the midst of a few movements pushing towards agriculture reform. And when I say reform, I don't always mean in the regenerative sense that Ari and I are really advocating for. It's a coin. It's got two sides and an edge. So, maybe it's got three sides. Anyways, the US and EU are both experiencing parallel legislative and grassroots shifts. Both are pivotal moments for food policy. On one hand, you have the EU's Common Agricultural Policy, which is prioritizing simplification, safeguards for farmers, and decarbonizing its economy. And on the other, you have the US, which is experiencing an enormous rollback of regulations and federal program uncertainty. So it begs the question, if demand requires us to move away from traditional subsidize and produce models towards climate smart, in the least greenwashing sense, and fair access frameworks, which we have talked about ad nauseum, what policies will we need to support for our farmers as well as our environmental goals to actually come to full fruition? And because we're in 2026, many of the landmark bills like the U.S. Farm Bill and the EU's Green New Deal have just entered their new compliance cycles, meaning we will likely see our respective agriculture industries experience in real time win and learn moments. And I don't say win and lose, because I really do think that while there are times where policy hits the intended target, there are times where it misses the mark, but that's not necessarily a loss as much as it's a moment for us to say, okay, well, let's do it differently next time. So I'm going to say that at the top of this, because we're going to talk about some things and be pretty critical of them. But that doesn't mean that we're saying they're nothing or that they don't matter. It's just that we are pointing out where we can do better, which is also something that our guests have shared with us throughout this season. It's not that there is a lack of any regulation, it's that where there is, it can still be better. So with that, in the US, there are several policies, acts, bills that are addressing industrial agriculture and food security, and we're just going to cover a few.
Yes, and before I get into some of the ones that we've selected to cover in the US, everyone say thank you to Lexi for really fine-tuning, fine-combing what is actually making a difference here and what's not, because it is greatly appreciated, and she's going to law school because she has the eyes for this. I am here to bring you the bright orange polo shirt.
We actually
Everyone.
this is a very nice color combination. I really like this color.
Oh
blue
yeah,
with
it
that
actually
orange.
is. Everyone tune in on YouTube or the Spotify video, because like we always somehow color coordinate, even if it's unexpected. This is love that
Happy
for us.
accident.
Okay, so as all of our accidents are, I don't think.
No,
have we
I'm
had
gonna
a
take
bad
that back.
accident?
Oh, us? Or just
Yeah, you and me only
Uh,
have happy accidents.
yeah.
I mean, there are definitely unhappy accidents. Like when I fell off the motorino, busted my knee, busted my chin.
Found out how the Italian healthcare system actually works and
Yep,
its
I did.
licensing system.
I found out some things the hard way.
Okay.
Quite literally, my head hit the asphalt. Definitely hard. Anyway, my head hit the asphalt, and that's why I can no longer comprehend policy by myself.
United States policy, specifically.
Most importantly. Segueing into that U.S. policy. So broadly in the U.S., the agricultural landscape is defined by two giants. Okay? Again, before I keep going, just remember there are criticisms, okay? We're not necessarily like major advocates for any of this. We're just telling you guys what's going on, showing you guys that there's energy and movement toward the direction. And then as we do this, we're probably going to tear the new later. So, but the agricultural landscape is defined by two giants: the 2018 Farm Bill and the continued rollout of the Inflation Reduction Act, aka the IRA. While the IRA focused on climate-smart agriculture, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act rescinded an unobligated environmental quality incentives program funds that were conditioned on soil carbon, nitrogen reduction, and GHG sequestration outcomes. All unobligated portions of that fund are now clawed back into the Treasury.
Yeah.
The 2018 Farm Bill now is set to end September 30th, 2026. So the House Agriculture Committee recently introduced the Farm, Food, and National Security Act of 2026, aka the 2026 Farm Bill. In its current form, we'd like to emphasize one provision that promotes soil carbon goals.
Yes, and that would be the State Assistance for Soil Health, which creates a grant program for state-level soil health initiatives under the Conservation Stewardship Program by providing massive direct incentives for farmers to adopt cover cropping and no-till farming to sequester carbon. This is one of the clearer nods to regenerative adjacent practices in the bill. I don't know that I would go so far as saying it's a move to be regenerative. I don't even think that the bill directly calls out carbon sequestration, which is part of the really fun things that you learn about legislation in the United States, but that's a soapbox for another time. Outside of the 2026 Farm Bill, there are other initiatives taking shape and making waves. One of those is the USDA National Proving Grounds Network for Ag Tech. This is a newer federal initiative to test new technologies, especially AI, so that farmers will have some sort of assurance that, quote unquote, new technologies will deliver tangible value on the ground whether through lower input costs, reduced labor demands, or greater overall efficiency. I will point out that none of that necessarily has anything to do with being better stewards or better
Yeah.
stewardship of the environment. It's
Mm-hmm.
primarily focused on economical and
Yeah.
labor-based things, but again, just it's there. It's happening. And it's not
Well,
a nothing provision, but
it's not a nothing provision, but I just from like doing the research for this season, I know that this particularly this issue, like the input costs and labor demands and just all of that in the farming industry right now, especially in the US, is a very big pain point. So
Mm.
I'm really hoping that this is addressed properly because it is the reason why like agriculture monopolies are able to take over in the states because they can put whatever cost they want on inputs. They can set prices wherever, and they can drown smallholder farms just because they can.
Yeah.
So,
Supply chain
um,
issues are really important in this particular industry.
yeah.
No surprise.
So, I'm not very hopeful like under the Trump administration, to be honest, but I'm really hoping that this particular initiative does something.
I
Anyway,
think it'll also
we
have
can't
some.
forget.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I also think it'll have some unintended positive environmental impacts. Like, just because something doesn't call out that it will do something environmentally
Yeah,
beneficial doesn't mean that it will do something unintentionally.
right,
Anyways,
right.
continue, please. I could talk about this all day.
We both could, which is why we need to move on to the next one. I don't want us to forget about the bills and programs aimed at food security and access specifically. Another really important thing to be addressing.
Yeah.
Um, shouldn't we don't get us started. Let's just actually talk about the initiatives. So, incorporated into the 2026 Farm Bill is an expanded Gus Schumacher Nutrition Incentive Program, also known as the Gus NIP. And if enacted in its current state, this expansion would do a few interesting things. Namely, it would remove the matching requirement for persistently poor communities.
Mhm.
This addresses a real structural problem like those we discussed last week. Historically, Gus NIP has flowed disproportionately to areas with strong nonprofit and food system infrastructure capable of raising local match, which often aren't the communities with the deepest food access problems. Okay, we see this all the time. It's like the money gets funneled into the places that kind of already have like the resources and funding to do all of that. I argue that a lot of that is intentional too, but soapbox for another time. Second thing that the Gus NIP initiative under the Farm Bill would do is expand the eligible incentive foods beyond just fresh, yes, quote unquote, produce. This means Gus NIP funded incentives can now support not just fresh, but frozen produce, canned, and dried fruits and vegetables, as well as legumes. So supporters of this amendment say this is a positive scope expansion, actually, that could dramatically increase Gus NIP's reach, particularly for SNAP participants in food deserts or during winter months when fresh produce access is limited or unaffordable. But the critics say something else. They say that this misses the point of Gus NIP's original purpose, which was to improve nutrition and support local farmers and regional food systems. As we discussed what policies we will need to support our farmers as well as our environmental goals, we must consider the power of another form of governmental control: executive orders.
My favorite.
Trump's favorite too.
Yeah, the Trump administration issues quite a lot of executive orders about a whole slew of different topics.
Also without permission.
I'm eyeball
Also-
deep in freaking climate-related executive orders as I write the paper that I need to turn in to graduate. No one talked to me about it. Yes, it was due last semester. No, I didn't do it. Anyways, one of the executive orders that we would like to address here is a recent one, and that's the order promoting the national defense by ensuring an adequate supply of elemental phosphorus in glyphosate-based herbicides. Invoking the Defense Production Act, which is a wartime provision, I guess kind of apt, come to think of it. But anyways, and the whole point of this is to boost domestic production of glyphosate at first glance. But without going into the debate about glyphosate's dangers and the politics surrounding this chemical, let's just focus on what this executive order accomplishes, because executive orders are really powerful. They occupy a space unlike any other. I guess they occupy a space in the way that like the Supreme Court occupies a space, in the way that the legislature can occupy a space. So they are a tool to be used in policy change, but they are done by one person and one person only, and that's the president. Anyway, so what does this executive order accomplish? It provides a liability shield under the Defense Production Act to domestic manufacturers of glyphosate. That means folks alleging to have been injured by glyphosate wouldn't be able to seek a remedy. Second, it instructs federal agencies to prioritize domestic manufacturing capacity and availability of materials needed to produce glyphosate and elemental phosphorus. I won't go into the fact that there's like one company that does this in the United States, and that alone is like a sort of nanny state example. But anyways, moving on, I won't do it. Third, it strengthens domestic supply chains for glyphosate-based herbicides. So again, it's like the promotion of this potentially toxic, dangerous chemical. It just had a few billion-dollar lawsuits settle with people that were injured by it. Anyways, again, I'm not going to go into it. And finally, it prevents the EPA from regulating glyphosate further. The EPA gets its power partly from Congress and partly from executive orders. So by the administration saying don't, if the EPA is not mandated by Congress to take a look at it, it's not going to be able to take a look at it. Now, when we look to answer what policies we will need to support our farmers and this equitable transition, we need to consider this sort of situation where there is an executive order that flies in the face of the efforts we are trying to achieve. And repealing or simply stopping an executive order is not all that straightforward. The simplest way is for a president to repeal the order. Trump has done that with a lot. Trump has done that with a lot of other presidents' executive orders. I don't see him doing that here. Shockingly. But a second way to weaken the order is for Congress, the purse of our federal system, if you will, to defund an executive action through a properly enacted spending prohibition. Again, I'm not suggesting that this is easy, but Congress could also try overriding the immunity provision by creating a federal cause of action for anyone injured by glyphosate, and also eliminating the manufacturer's ability to use the federal contractor defense, which is like a common law defense. And it would apply here because Trump is saying it's a national security thing, so it's a military issue. Anyways, again, not getting into it, just saying. But the No Immunity for Glyphosate Act, which is a recently introduced bill, proposes to both defund and nullify the conferred immunity. So again, pointing out that these sort of policy frameworks work, and in order to affect them, we have a couple of options.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my gears are turning a little bit just because sometimes, I mean, you and I talk about glyphosate a lot just because like we're doing this this podcast season and we're like involved in the industry, but like I won't take 20 minutes. Let me just say glyphosate and that kind of chemical herbicide is completely banned in the EU.
It's dangerous.
Because it's dangerous. So
why did they just settle a lawsuit if it wasn't dangerous? Anyways, go ahead.
So
go.
all I'm gonna say is look it up. And if you're wondering why, like Lexi and I will dwell on this, like these glyphosate related executive orders, that's why. Go do your research. Use the Google machine. I think we even talked about glyphosate in one of the earlier episodes. Anyway, so
we did. Briefly.
We shall be keeping an eye on that bill. But in the meantime, let's just go to the EU. Let's talk about the EU. Like Lexi said a few minutes ago, the EU's common agriculture policy is prioritizing simplification, safeguards for farmers, and decarbonizing its economy. But again, EU is flawed in its efforts as well. Okay, we're not trying to say like the EU is like the pillar and the United States needs to follow suit on everything. I do think the EU tends to be like a little more aggressive with like actual reform policies, but it's not perfect, obviously. Launched in the 1960s, its purpose is to provide a unified framework for supporting farmers, ensuring food security, and managing the rural environment across member states. The current phase of the Common Agricultural Policy, which established binding regulations on all member states, runs from 2023 to 2027. It includes the European Green Deal's updated 2026 mandates. Now, we would be fibbers if we said this program has gone off without a hitch. Like I said a few seconds ago, it's not perfect. Cue manure being sprayed in the streets. That is so graphic. I just like... Beginning December 2023, farmers took to the streets, okay, to protest these green rules with complaints regarding low income, imposition in the business conditions they have available, and trade agreements that undercut their prices.
Yeah, and the European Parliament responded in kind by adopting the Common Agricultural Policy Simplification Package. This policy overall aims to support farmers and improve agricultural productivity, ensuring a stable supply of affordable food, safeguard the European Union farmers to make a reasonable living, help tackle climate change and the sustainable management of natural resources, maintain rural areas and landscapes across the EU, keep the rural economy alive by promoting jobs in farming, agri-food industries, and associated sectors. So these protest spurred revisions within this framework are not the only ones we want to share. Ari, can you walk us through a few other compliance and regulation mechanisms we can take as maybe inspiration for more and improved reform?
Yeah, the EU farmers really said make farming sexy again. You know what I'm saying? They were like
make farming less
basically.
Sorry.
But of course. I'll cover some planet impact ones first, then some food security and access points.
Solid.
The LULUCF revision 2026 compliance is focused on carbon sinks specifically. So we are now in the first year of the high ambition 2026-2030. 2030, Ariana? Is that a year? 2030. That sounds
a long time
far.
From now.
That sounds far. Oh, I'll make it 2026 to 2030 period. This compliance revision means EU member states are legally required to ensure that greenhouse gas removals in their land use sector, aka soils and forests, exceed emissions. Next, carbon farming regulation. So a new framework that allows farmers to sell carbon credits for verified soil sequestration, creating a business model of sorts for climate-friendly farming. As of February March 2026, the Commission has officially adopted the first carbon farming methodologies for agroforestry and peatland rewetting. Farmers can now begin the certification process to sell CRCF certified credits to private buyers or state agencies.
Now that sounds like... No, I'm kidding. Keep going.
I have so many opinions. Oh, God. Okay. Now, there is another act we included here it's the Circular Economy Act, okay, which Lexi and I both have like greenwashing suspicions about it, but that's again a song for another time. Today we're going to hone in specifically on its like agriculture specific targets. And it targets water management and waste reduction by promoting the recycling of organic byproducts, that's manure, guys, back into fertilizers, reducing the need for industrial gas-heavy synthetic fertilizers. Now, here is where this gets relevant to current events, baby. Now, this is all current events, okay? This is all 2026, like 2020-something policies that we're talking about. But you guys know about that war in Iran, the war with Iran? And you guys know how like the Strait of Hormuz was shut down? And you guys know how that impacted the fertilizer industry? No? You don't? Oh yeah, that's because most synthetic fertilizers are petroleum-based, people. So what happened? Strait gets shut. Farmers lose access to their synthetic fertilizer inputs. That gets incredibly more expensive, and they're already drowning in costs. They're already drowning in bankruptcy. They're already drowning in because of agricultural consolidation and input consolidation. They did not need this. They did not need this too. So this particular act I did want to mention because I think it's worth noting that there are movements trying to encourage and promote recycling of organic byproducts to use for fertilizers rather than like being so heavily reliant on the petroleum-based ones for synthetic fertilizers. Okay? It's all connected. I hope you guys see how this is all connected. Hotel Earth tries to connect those dots for you. Yeah, the war with Iran has a lot to do with agriculture. Okay? Next, nature restoration law. This sets binding targets to restore degraded ecosystems, including peatlands and wetlands drained for agriculture, which are major carbon bombs. If you guys didn't know, wetlands and peatlands are serious carbon sinks. They just absorb all the carbon. They keep it nice and packed in there. So when that stuff gets drained, it releases a bunch of carbon. Wow, crazy how the carbon cycle works when it's disrupted. Then we have some policies addressing food security.
Keep going.
I'm just so passionate about the carbon cycle. I'm just so passionate about the carbon cycle. I promise we'll get back to Lexi in a second, but let me just give you two more EU initiatives. It's like the goalie for what was that? What was that World Cup? Was it 2014? And there were so many memes like the Germany's goalie just because they were just like 8 goals in a row. Anyway, don't ask me why I watched FIFA in 2014. My dad made me. We have some policies addressing food security and access, like the EU livestock strategy. So as I commented when Lexi was going over some US policies and initiatives, addressing food security and access is just so beyond necessary that it makes me personally very hopeful to see that it's being addressed and even if it's not quite like reaching closing the gaps all the way, the fact that it's a conversation is just like obviously step one. So this is a new plan which would focus on competitiveness and sustainability, specifically aiming to reduce the density of industrial livestock while keeping high quality protein accessible and affordable across the union. Huge.
Yeah.
Huge, because I mean a lot of the reason we have industrial agriculture is to bring costs down, to make it accessible, right? So the fact that they're trying to target this problem is huge. Finally, we have the fairer income support. The 2026 CAP reform introduced a budget realignment to ensure 10% of direct payments are redistributed to smaller farms. That's something. This is designed to stop large industrial conglomerates from eating up all the subsidies, redistributing that money to smallholder farms who provide better food access and better food quality, honestly, in rural areas.
Yeah. And there's also been, thank you for that, honestly, like,
that spiel.
There's a lot to consider there. Thank you. And it's not just the EU and the US, obviously, that are having these kinds of conversations or like policy enactments. You and I were discussing a treaty earlier that we ultimately are not including. But for those who are concerned about the globalization of it all, there's at least one that we're going to mention here before we move on to how we can like improve some of these policies. And that example is the now delayed EU deforestation regulation, which would make the 7 commodities, soy, beef, palm oil, cocoa, coffee, rubber, and timber, that are placed on the EU market. They cannot contribute to global deforestation or forest degradation. And that's a massive stick for industrial agriculture in the Amazon and Southeast Asia, where deforestation is rampant. So it's sort of like the tuna boycott.
Yep.
Using the label safe, dolphin safe. Obviously, they're not talking about dolphins here, but similar process.
I bet that the voices that really amplified this were probably indigenous people.
It very well could be. I mean,
that's their home.
That is their home. And I mean, Namonte Ninquimo in her book talks about how she was able, with her community, to preserve a lot of these areas so that they are not exploited for oil. But byproduct, I'm sure, is also timber. And before we move on, I'd like to circle back to the protests Ari was telling us about and why it's crucial for us to have these conversations.
Manure in the streets.
Yeah. No, actually those ones. And why it's important for people like yourselves, listeners, and for Ari and I, even some Little Hope Corps. A study named Farmers' Voices in European Protests, Diverse Complaints, Emotional Tones, and Policy Responses surveyed protest motivations in Germany, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. They interviewed farmers who were actually protesting about, why. And I'd like to share 2 of the top societal criticisms that were shared by these protesting farmers.
Interesting.
And they're both quotes. So the first is 95% of people have no idea about agriculture. So step 1, pat yourself on the back. True. Because you being here.
That's why we did this.
Being here helps.
This, guys. Oh, she said pat yourself on the back, and I literally patted myself. She meant pat your back. People who are listening.
Honestly, potato. No, it's. I said at the beginning. I said it was for both of us as well as the listeners. But the other quote that I'd like to share is a reminder that I think maybe Ari and I, maybe we haven't said it as clearly in this season, and I don't ever want it to come off as us like pointing the finger at farmers. But this quote is, "We are considered polluters, but we are the ones who provide food for everyone." It is true. People
that struck a chord.
Yeah.
That struck a chord.
Yeah. It is not the fault of farmers for being in some of these situations, which is why, in addition to the policy levers that we talk about today, we also must just be better to one another. The strength of our bonds to each other will not only launch us forward in our policy movements, but it will also sew the gaps where we have allowed to take shape between us. It's really sad to see that these farmers feel ostracized by society. All right, so as promised, we're also going to talk about the gaps in policy today.
we need to address these because Lexi and I are both of the opinion that, yes, I think it's awesome that like grassroots movements and voices have shaped some of the policy we just listed out here. But obviously, a lot of the times, how do I put this? It's not, the policy isn't always written in the best interests of those voices, right? A lot of times, like, it's industry and like, their sway in how policy is actually written. So, as promised, here we go. While the policies of 2026 show progress, they are currently under heavy fire from two sides. So there's those who are concerned with environmental safety and food justice. That would be, you guys and Lexi and I, who say that they are too soft, frankly, and they're too soft specifically on industrial giants. Okay, because like I said, a lot of time this policy, through lobbying power is written to not be so tough on industry, right? Or like maybe it's literally written so that it's like so confusing that it ends up just benefiting the industry anyway. And then there is the other side, the industry side, industry groups specifically, who argue that these forward-thinking policies are too hard on production. Okay, it makes production impossible. It makes it too expensive, or that there's too many ceilings put on the flow to make production flow better. So we're just gonna try and summarize where a lot of these policies are not really filling the need that it needs to be. So with a lack of a better phrasing, and climate smart branding aside, critics point to three major structural failures. Okay, so like the persistence problem, which basically is like a study published in 2025, I think, that found that less than 10% of fields actually maintain cover crops long term. Okay, like, great. Then there's the methane loophole. So we've talked about this before. Much of 2026 funding, especially in the US, I think in the EU as well, goes toward anaerobic digesters, which are machines that turn manure into energy. And this is considered a false solution because it incentivizes mega dairies and industrial meat production and industrial meat farming to just keep thousands of cows in place in order to keep the digester running. It really just ends up funding factory farms. Okay, not what we want. That's not the intention of the methane, of the methane
Closing
digester.
the methane
You're supposed
loop.
to be trying. Thank you. Finally, we've got data blackouts. And this is in a controversial 2025 move, the USDA paused several key food security surveys, which created a data gap for 2026, making it basically impossible, at least difficult, for policy advocates to track how many people are falling into food deserts. That should be illegal. That should be clear and accessible information.
I agree. And industry pushback is no joke either. So, high level overview, this is basically the David versus Goliath narrative that we alluded to at the top of the episode. Because industrial trade groups aren't just resisting the policies, they are reframing them as a threat to things like national security and food affordability. I've seen that a lot personally in just my day-to-day existence here in the United States.
Yeah. And I think they've just become masterful storytellers, right? It's all this way of telling a narrative to make you feel a certain way. Like glyphosate being a national security issue. Please.
Yeah.
Riddle me that.
Yeah. So there's a few things in the United States that occur in this arena. The first is the quote-unquote regulatory overreach argument, where lobbyists will try to keep climate smart practices voluntary, and that their stance is basically like, oh, well, if you enforce this, if you have too much regulatory overreach, we're not going to be able to give you affordable food. So it keeps these things as voluntary rather than mandated. And then another is the budget cuts that we've seen across the United States. And that there's an attack on discretionary funding for places like the USDA climate hubs. And the last is the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, which included provisions for debt relief specifically targeted at socially disadvantaged farmers, but a lot of environmental justice, if not all environmental justice, anything that has to do with diversity, inclusion, equity, a lot of that language has been stripped, and things that had it as a descriptor in its funding or budget request have been denied. And as we talked about earlier, a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act has been either amended or terminated. So it's, anyways, moving on to Europe for a moment, there's also the EUDR delay, which we talked about earlier, so I won't belabor it, but this was supposed to come out in 2025, and it's now been pushed out to the end of this year, if it happens at all. And that occurred because of intense lobbying from the United States and Southeast Asian exporters. And finally, there's the Sparkle Strike, which is what we talked about earlier with the large industrial farms in Central Europe protesting the nature restoration law, which we also talked about, claiming that returning 4% of their land to nature makes them uncompetitive against cheap imports from countries with no such rules, which might not necessarily be untrue. We're not saying that these farmers are incorrect in their claims, but it's an example of where the policy gap should protect those who are falling below that, falling below the ability to keep up with these policy changes.
Exactly. And running with that, I know earlier in the episode when we were going over like food security and food access policy initiatives that I would even exclaimed, was like, I'm excited to see that. But these policies often treat food access, which is like calories basically, and food quality, which is nutrients, as separate issues. And this creates a significant flaw. And there is a really big food security gap in access versus quality that we need to address. So the administrative burden, which basically is leading to 25% of administrative costs shifting in the United States. And this is leading to some states to just like simplify their systems by cutting eligibility. And it's projected to reduce participation by 2.4 million people in 2026. This is potentially going to worsen food deserts. So that's kind of like a completely redundant and it's amplifying the problem that it's supposed to be addressing. Then there's the like we're calling it the processed food subsidy, right? So it's actually not called that, but while we have new nutrition incentives under the GUS NIP movement, the core of the Farm Bill still subsidizes the ingredients for ultra-processed foods. Okay, that's corn syrup, soy oil, palm oil, etc. So this creates a policy paradox, and the government pays to make the bad food cheap, then pays for nutrition programs to help afford the good food. Like, major gap now being filled there. If anything, like as Lexi said, exacerbating problems. If you're watching on YouTube or on Spotify, we're going to include a table here that like kind of goes over some of like the policies we've discussed, the industry argument, and like the reality of the gap that it's not filling. So take a look at that. Now we'd like to include a clip from Erin Gilliam, who is a land restore and grazing specialist that we've introduced in previous episodes, revealing a hard truth about how government interventions sometimes make regenerative efforts completely and utterly impossible to achieve.
But the government has put in regulations saying you cannot use strychnine poison, you can't leave snare traps out. Hunting of predators is essentially a government-controlled thing. If you have a predator problem, you typically have to call in a government trapper to deal with that, and you have to prove that that predator is causing financial damage to your operation. It's not that it's impossible, but yeah, there's regulations there. But to get other certifications like animal welfare approved, regenerative, sustainable, organic, all those things are voluntary. I don't know if making them mandatory would do anything but stop ranching flat out. Like, it's already, the people who are in ranching are already, at least in our area, losing money. If you forced them to take on more expenses to manage differently, but you didn't do anything to get them a higher dollar, in return, you would effectively stop the operation. So perfect would be the opponent of good in that situation.
So some policies exist, which means that some of the concerns within the agriculture industry, concerns that are coming from the grassroots level, are being, at the very least, acknowledged. The demand is rising, but there are a lot of gaps to fill, as we've discussed. So how do we fill those gaps? How do we address the flaws within the policies that we have just mentioned?
Well, tune in next week because we are covering those gaps and how to stage a consumer rebellion. Hoteler 360 is written and produced by Ariana Halvai and Lexi Moorhead. Interviews featured in this episode include Grace Johnson, educator and urban farm manager, Tucker Garrison, founder of Imlakesh Organics, and Cole Rainey, a land steward and community organizer at Sage Stewart Farm. This episode was edited by Bob. Find us at hoteler360.com and wherever you listen to your podcasts.